Billionaire investors of the internet era are now locked in a war of words and influence to determine whether AI's future will be one of concentrated safety or unfettered advancement. The stakes couldn't be higher. This debate is about how those tools will be applied moving forward in society. You have some of the most powerful people in the world, literal world leaders, the Pope of all people, paying attention to these folks coming out of Silicon Valley who have very different views. And so while these conversations are sometimes happening behind closed doors and not making it to the general public, I think it's very important for our audience to know that this debate is happening and that the direction of AI development is being fiercely fought ideologically right now.
I see AI as a really, really powerful tool that will enable a set of things that otherwise we wouldn't think of it as plausible.
Vinod Khosla is a legend in Silicon Valley and the wider tech community. He co-founded one of the most important computing companies of the 1980s into the 90s called Sun Microsystems. Since then, he's been an elder statesman in the tech community, and he was the first institutional investor in what was then a small AI company known as OpenAI. He sees AI as a great economic equalizer that can sort of raise up the developing world while also improving the health and daily lives of people in places like the US as well. We caught up with Vinod Khosla at Khosla Ventures office in Menlo Park to hear more.
It's possible now to build an AI doctor that would be free doctors, like a primary care physician for everybody. The same with teachers. We could have a free AI tutor for every child on the planet for the cost of computing, which, as you know, is very cheap and declining. That's true of generally most expertise over the next 10, 20 years will be essentially free, which is a fundamental restructuring of how we value expertise in society. Now, whether as a society we allow this to happen, that's up to each country by itself. I don't think that should be a concern, but it is a concern that people have when it comes to AI, because it's so powerful.
How do we, as human beings, play this game to win, right? And by winning, it means we make our societies better, we take the things that we value, it's part of the reason we value middle-class society, like education and wisdom and compassion, and how do we become better in all these characteristics?
Vinod Khosla and Reid Hoffman are both key early investors in OpenAI in their own way, and they're both influential with sort of different spheres of the AI landscape. They agree on a lot of subjects, but not all. Reid Hoffman is an early member of the PayPal Mafia, the legendary group of Silicon Valley tech leaders, including folks like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Max Levchin, who were members of PayPal when it was a startup in the early days of the dot-com era. And then he made a name for himself as the co-founder of LinkedIn, the well-known professional network that was acquired by Microsoft for over $20 billion. Reid has since been a key investor at a venture capital firm called Greylock, where he actually brought in OpenAI, and at that time it was a nonprofit with no business plan, so the firm actually didn't invest. But Reid invested early on through his foundation, and he's been involved with a number of other important AI companies. He also has stood out to us on our radar because he has done podcasts and books where he's used AI tools himself. He wrote a book using ChatGPT, and he has met with everyone from President Joe Biden to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo to Rishi Sunak in the UK. He's had multiple breakfasts with French President Emmanuel Macron.
If one could say, I'm spending 110% of my time on AI, that would be somewhat accurate, just because the question around what does it mean for us, not just as investors, because we have this enormous focus on this at Greylock, but also from society impact. What does it mean for the future of work? What does it mean for how individuals navigate their lives? And it's something that I started a number of years ago when I had the fortune to be part of the founding team for OpenAI for how that was going to pull together. And it was AI, which has been described to be here a number of times, is now really here. And so what does it mean for us as human beings? Now, that humanist hat might surprise people as it really matters as an investor. And so it's the entire range. And so it goes everything from, co-founding a company, the first since LinkedIn, to, helping academic institutions or nonprofits, in addition of obviously governments, navigate this new world of how AI is transforming us.
Reid Hoffman calls himself an optimist. He actually says that he was a techno-optimist before Marc Andreessen was. And Reid believes that overall AI is going to have the same exciting impacts for society that someone like Vinod Khosla would. He thinks that it could lead to great breakthroughs for medicine, for education, for business as well. But Reid compares AI to an automobile that you are driving from Los Angeles to San Francisco. It's faster than before, it's cooler than before, you want to see what it can do, but at the same time, he believes in perhaps slowing down at corners, and for that, he means cutting-edge technology like these models from OpenAI that he thinks, at a certain level of proficiency could have security impact. For example, creating a bioweapon. Hoffman says for a lot of things, if they're relatively harmless use cases, you can put the genie back in the bottle. But if a model somehow allowed you to become a bioweapons expert and 100 million people got access to it, it would be very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. On the flip side, there's Marc Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape, and Andreessen Horowitz, an influential venture capital firm. Marc believes that open source is the way to go. Andreessen believes that the market itself can sort of dictate what is safe, what is allowable here. You don't need new regulation and new rules, especially at the level of these models themselves, to keep people safe, keep progress moving. In fact, Marc even wrote in an essay that anyone who tries to slow down AI development is basically murdering people because it is slowing down the life-saving potential of AI. It's important to note that almost everyone we talk to about AI, including all these Midas-less investors, consider themselves optimists in some way about AI. Where they start to disagree is about how powerful these tools are, how dangerous they could be, and what kind of regulation or guardrails should be placed on them. In reporting this story, we went down to Washington, D.C. to a conference called the Hill and Valley Forum, where we saw Khosla and a bunch of other leaders from AI speak with lawmakers. What's so interesting about this is that you actually have lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, trying to learn a lot about AI and decide what U.S. policy should be along these lines.
Perhaps the biggest nightmare is the looming new industrial revolution, the displacement of millions of workers.
Interesting. Should we have a license required for these tools?
We're going to have all kinds of misinformation.
What kind of an innovation is it going to be?
Are you considering protections for content generators and creators?
So there's clearly implications of AI in national security, whether it's surveillance through TikTok or through Hawaii telecommunications equipment, or just cyber warfare. Also things like drones weaponized by AI. So there's clearly a very large risk and race there. Even larger than that is the social impact of a race. If China wins the race, then they will get to convey economic benefits to many other parts of the world. That's why I think this race with China is so important. And we should be acknowledging it's a race and not trusting the process and not relying on things like treaties, etc.
If you're in a probability increasing of, I'll use the shorthand, a Terminator universe, you want to know that that's a probability increasing and you want to be doing things to decrease that probability. The thing of where it just accidentally happens, a la, the Terminator movie, is I think highly implausible. The mistake, I think, of this dialogue is that it's the robots are coming rather than the humans are coming with the robots. Like, just as AI is a human amplifier of good people, it's also an amplifier of bad people. And so you have to have that navigation for how do we help as many good people, doctors, other things, and as few bad people, terrorists, rogue states, criminals. That's part of the reason why engaging in the conversations with, the AI doomers is useful, because you're finding what would be the thing we'd be looking for if your science fiction example suddenly increased from low probability science fiction to something growing, and then how would we navigate that? Because again, I think we could navigate it. I'm sympathetic with the concern and not sympathetic with the process and the tools.
So Vinod believes that AI should be able to be developed largely ad hoc and freely, except with certain advanced models that should be regulated by the government. And he says that at the sort of cutting edge, what he calls frontier models, AI should be regulated and perhaps controlled so that you don't have these models getting shared into potential enemies of the US, such as China, North Korea, Iran. Reid Hoffman believes that these models should be protected and regulated so that you don't accidentally create the next COVID-19 or some sort of bioweapon that would affect millions of people. He sees these models as just becoming so frickin' powerful that we can't keep up with controlling them after we've released them. To hear the other point of view, we caught up with Bill Gurley, a former Midas lister who now lives in Texas.
It's remarkably interesting that the biggest doomers are the ones that have the biggest financial stakes and the biggest foundational model. Like if you were coming to me and saying, here's a panel of 15 academics who've got nothing in this, who all think this is what should happen, then it'd be a different conversation. But you have people, this is, Vinod will tell you, he's the earliest, largest investor in OpenAI. Once again, that's a pretty ironic name, as Elon has pointed out. But he's also, Vinod also it plays this card, which I really dislike, which is this vilification of China. The entrepreneurs in China are remarkable and very talented. And it's not as rocket science as you want to believe. There's already enough information out there for them to have their own open source models. And so if you pull up and say there's no open source here and you leave open source there, guess where it's going to be the most innovative, where you're going to have the most entrepreneurs, where you're going to have the most innovation? It's going to be over there. And we're going to have created this muddy, wasteland where entrepreneurs can't move around. The thing I would ask these people is, why do they have confidence that Washington would be good at regulating something this nascent? Like, why would they be effective? Like, the only rules that they want are the ones that they wrote. These models have been out there for a couple of years, and we haven't had massive, crimes. I mean, there's incidents, but there's incidents with every new technology that's come along. Crimes are still crimes. If I defraud you with AI, it's still illegal as it would have been if I'd have done it with a phishing scam before AI. And so why do we need new laws? Why do we need new agencies? Let's just use the laws that are on the book.
One thing that I really picked up on in reporting this story was that folks like Bill Gurley and Martin Casado felt a huge sense of urgency. This is the time to be talking about this stuff, according to them, which is kind of interesting because a lot of people agree that these AI tools are super early. We are seeing right now that Google's AI tools are, telling people to put glue on pizza. We're seeing OpenAI have all sorts of issues with its tools as well. This is an early technology with a lot of bumps, and outside the tech world, plenty of people think that these AI tools aren't that useful at all. So if it's such early days, why is it so important that we be having this debate right now? And a lot of the people we spoke to basically feel like this is the moment that we kind of dictate the conversation, that the tone that will affect the next few years is being set right now.
We are going to have policies here. Some of the policies may just be kind of clarifications or extensions of current policies. Some of the policies will be new policies. We're creating this revolutionary technology, not surprisingly, that will require some new thinking, some new balances of what balances between, citizens' interests and consumers' interests and, industry interest and government interest, and how do you bring all those together? And that's part of what policy does, is to say, let's make sure that these are shaped in good ways. But I think it's very early, and anybody who thinks they know the right policy shape right now is either deluding themselves or deluding you. And so we have to learn it together, and that's the really important part.
Regulation is the friend of the incumbent. It's not time for the government to start picking winners. And one thing that your readers should be aware of is even Reid and Vinod are spending a ton of time in Washington, and they've put money in super PACs. I've spent 25 years in this business and not had to go kowtow to Washington to go placate different senators and congressmen. And I think it'd just be a horrible step for the venture industry for this to be the first move when any new wave comes along, is for people to run and become friends with the government and try and lock in their winners. I think that's just a horrible precedent.
There'll be some refinement of policy and implementation of these laws, maybe some new legislation over time, but currently I think they're sufficient. That doesn't say we won't have litigation. We will have litigation because people have different points of view, but I do think we don't fundamentally need to restructure what needs to be done. There's a very optimistic future that's possible. I have a dozen forecasts about plausible tomorrows, and I'm pretty optimistic